Hey guys, Thomas the Silly Jr. here, aka Mustached, and I'm here to review Disney's Pinocchio 2022. If you end up enjoying this full review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers, second and third will head you over to my Patreon and PayPal, and the fourth will head you over to my Discord server where you can join other YouTubers and comment and collab and share stuff there too. And Shilling will be reminded at the end of the review as well. With that out of the way, let's get into Disney's Pinocchio 2022. So, this is on the continuation of course, Disney's live action, I guess in this case, slash CGI remakes of a once animated classic. We're diving into Disney's Pinocchio. And Pinocchio is among one of those stories that has been told quite a few times, which isn't so surprising. There have been horror versions, there have been more, versions for other countries, there have been, so on and so forth, so on in betweens and all that good stuff, and weird animated ones which I haven't even seen. Point being is that Pinocchio has had his fair share of runs, but Disney has decided to remake from its original version of its own Disney version of Pinocchio. Pinocchio. So I'm here to review it as objectively as possible. Now I've seen some people's reactions to being freaked out by either the CGI or, in particular for Pinocchio, his character in comparison to others. I've seen some reviews, a little bit off, but I am here to be as objective as possible. So with that out of the way, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So, we start off the movie hearing from Jiminy's narration, and yes, I will point out that he, among the CGI characters, probably looks the most creepy, if anything, beyond Pinocchio. If I'm just gonna point that out, I might as well point it out right out of the gate. But once you get past the creepy factor of that, he talks to his past self through his narration, as we see the current Jiminy making his way to Geppetto's shop to find shelter. Apparently he's been hopping around from place to place trying to find a permanent home. So, as we are seeing things from currently Jiminy's perspective, we see that Geppetto, the old man, played by Tom Hanks, is grieving over having either lost his son or his son passing away. I think the movie actually, based off of the dialogue, and I'm paraphrasing here, I think it implies it actually could be one or the other, though I think it leans a little bit closer to his son has passed away in some unfortunate event. Though I guess, again, it could imply that he's been lost. Some of the words do kind of almost imply that too. Point being is that he runs a shop where he doesn't want to sell any of his clocks, where his mom, the original boy's mom, loved all of these clocks, and a lot of people, as I've made my references and checked out other reviews, said that the clocks were a pretty distraction in terms of it having several Disney references upon them, like Woody and Maleficent and Sleeping Beauty and a few others as well, Roger Rabbit. So it is a pretty noticeable thing, but in the long term, I suppose it's kind of meh. It's kind of like that kind of feeling, but it doesn't last too too painfully long, fortunately. Anyways, late at night, Geppetto sets off to get to rest, but he sees a wishing star. So he sees that he makes some pretty bad jokes and even has named Pinocchio because he's made of pine, and Occhio, I guess, is like, oak or whatever reference that is like incongruent. And we see that he also makes a reference to drinking, which is something that I find rather fascinating with something that happens later on in the movie. But we'll get to that. So, anyways, as all the things come to this conclusion, the light of this magic star brighten up and reflect off of like a picture, I guess, and it hits Pinocchio, and the Pinocchio, what puppet begins to come to life. And Jimmy makes, contact, saying, introducing himself, and the puppet mimics everything he's hearing back to whoever is saying it. So we get the introduction to the fairy. She comes in and offers a little bit of magic to, I guess, give him his own thoughts instead of like being like more like a parrot that just mimics. So he's able to formulate his own sentences now. So she offers, at first, a pretty interesting riddle. However, she then divvies into being rather direct about 3 virtues that he needs to have in order to become a real boy. That being, he has to be brave, non-selfish, and the third one being that he cannot lie, or, being truthful. And she sings the very classic song after the fact and wanders away. After that, Geppetto wakes up and freaks out when he hears Pinocchio can sing. So we get a really quick montage of, 2 days passing, I guess, or I don't know how many days, but certain amount of days passing, and them, seemingly having some goofs, trying to figure out how to, live in this, circumstance. Meanwhile, Jiminy gets help from a seagull, which is a new addition, I believe. But Pinocchio is set off to go to school, point being. And we are introduced to the fox and the cat. And the fox character, who is, people have pointed out, a lot more interestingly animated in terms of the CGI, manages to cut him off, Pinocchio, and tells him that he should just become an influencer. So, just become the YouTuber, don't go to school. Which, I find a very bizarre thing to say in this time frame, but I guess characters can use words that are more current. Like, influencer is something you would hear more in more common context, so it does sort of, the language in this movie does at some point sort of like leave, this sort of vintage like story. So that's that first part. And I think there is something interesting. I think there's a more interesting discussion than to just say, don't go to school. I mean, I think, based off his age, Pinocchio's age, assumingly he's the same age the boy would have been, I'm assuming at this point, that of course school would be, the forefront of, basic education. But I think there is something to be said about, people making it, at a certain point where school isn't no longer mandatory. College being primarily one of those things that you hear a lot about, of like this whole idea of like you need to go to college, you need that college expertise. And while that may be true of certain jobs, I don't think that is true. Is obviously not true of all of them. And yeah, there's this whole money aspect to college in comparison to, you know, your average school that definitely heightens the pain of that idea of like you must go to college, you must be the firstborn to go to college. And I know that's not what the story is saying, but it is something I thought is so bizarre to be like, yeah, it did make me think about it. So it's like, it's weird to have you know, be told earlier on, considering what happens in the movie. So we're gonna get to that too. So he gets cut off, but you know, Pinocchio still just is determined to get to school. So he's chosen to go to school. Okay, so that's cool. And they knock themselves out in the process. They have a mallet with them to, like, I guess, knock people out or whatever. Point being is, like, later on they come back. But here's the thing. This is where the movie gets really confusing. Pinocchio gets kicked out of school because he's a puppet. So, okay. So, you just told us in the movie, in the context of, you know, like, the basics of, like, okay, you should go to school. So he gets kicked out of school. So, I mean, do you necessarily even blame him for the adventure he sets out on? You kind of go, well, no. I mean, it was like the refusal to basic teaching. I don't know. And it seems like this world seems to have other entities that aren't humanoid, so I find it kind of off that they just generally kick out Pinocchio for being a puppet, and a talking puppet at that, but still. I don't know, it just feels really bizarre considering there's a talking fox, and I'm pretty sure he's probably tried to con other people, surely. But I mean, I know the story is primarily focused on Pinocchio, but point being, it just comes across as very, sort of, kind of getting in the way of, like, what you're trying to achieve. Like, I don't know, I feel like the obvious thing to do is just have that whole segment of him being kicked out not be in the movie. It just takes away from the idea that he would be tricked. That's sort of, I think, the original concept of it, is that he just gets tricked. He gets, you know, he gets hyped up on this idea that, you know, fame and fortune are this, you know, wondrous thing, and they potentially could be. That, I'm not even saying that that's necessarily even 100% wrong, but it's in the expense of him being kicked out of school. Like, that is a choice that the movie made. I'm not even sure why they did it. Again, it doesn't reinforce that it's not even necessarily all Pinocchio's fault. It's now split more so to the school's fault for not even letting it happen. Like, I don't understand. What was the movie trying to achieve by doing this? Anyways, so the fox comes back, and in a way, again, it's almost as if the fox is correct. He comes off as correct. They kicked him out. What he says afterwards, everything is correct. Like, what is this movie doing? It's no longer about the fox being cunning. The fox is just correct now. They misinterpreted what the fox is supposed to be in this movie. Like, what are you doing? Like, the fox, like, you know, this movie is all about the interpretations, and, you know, the three pillars that I just mentioned, the whole bravery, not lying, and not being selfish part. Okay, we get that. That's pretty easy stuff. And the representations of certain things are very obvious. Foxes, for whatever reason, are seen in cartoons and in fiction in general, are often seen as mischievous creatures, and this has been mocked in later movies, that is certain. But in more vintage films and, stories, that has been the case, seemingly. And in the original Pinocchio, that would certainly be the case, but they recontextualized it, but that makes the fox correct. That makes him no longer cunning, that just makes him correct about what he's asserting to Pinocchio. So, again, the whole him getting kicked out of school, they should have not put that in the movie. It completely detracts from the point of the character of the fox. It removes what they're trying to teach, the youth, the younger audience. If that is, their target audience, as some other people would like to point out, the target audience being kids. If that's who you're trying to teach this stuff to, then you ought to make it clear. This is a plan. This is a trick. This is, using that word language to your advantage to, slick around and be deceptive. That is the most important part. Being deceptive. And at first he is, but then he doesn't become deceptive anymore when the words he's speaking are true. So, again, I don't know why they did this. So, they've already fucked up the first section of the movie. So let's continue. So, Geppetto, after, we cut back to some time later, Geppetto begins to worry. Understandably so. Okay, he's a concerned father for all intents and purposes. And the acting is all fine and good there. So, Pinocchio ends up in this sort of puppet show, as he does in the original movie. There, he talks to this young woman who has her own puppet that she sort of uses to, get along with Pinocchio. And the thing about this is, it seems to cut. Like, there's an abrupt cut from Geppetto worrying to Pinocchio being in this scenario. And I think the idea was to sort of indicate that this was some time later, but it does not come across that way. It comes across as very abrupt. And it definitely leads to this sort of idea like this is all happening, as Geppetto puts it later on in the movie, all happening in one day, which I think is a mistake to put it that way and to make it sound like it came off as something that happens in one day. Because Pinocchio just knows the songs all of a sudden to this musical menagerie of, the famous song that he uses in the movie, No Strings on Me. Like, that's the song, I suppose, or, among the many songs, I suppose it's one of the more important ones. Besides Wish Upon a Star, which is obviously a very important one, but, I would figure that this is another important one to have in your movie, but it just comes across as like, oh, we're just abruptly here, he abruptly knows the song, it does come off a little off-putting. So anyways, he's fumbling a bit during the performance, still, and he even causes a little bit of a fire in the process when he's, kicking up his wooden legs against the wooden floor very quickly. So he does start a fire that way. But he manages to finish pretty strongly, and is even getting applause and a little bit of money. But in the process of that, he gets locked up. This scene comes across also a little odd, like the shift in dynamic is something I caught, where Stromboli, which is the the caravan owner of this whole shindig currently, is all like, haha, you did it, whatever. And then he's like, oh, but you're locked up now. And it's like, huh. So, it definitely feels like a very 180 shift of tone that they needed to push. And it definitely creates this idea of, this movie definitely feels like the pacing is very abrupt continuously. Like, we just have to move. And I do feel like you can let these scenes take a little bit longer. I think you can, like, stretch out, like, between a daytime shot and a nighttime shot that can help you determine, like, oh, it's nighttime now. Oh, it's the next day. Or, do another mini montage if that helps you sort of, him practicing the song and, stuff like that. Little mini add-ons could add a lot to your movie, so, what they decide to not show us is also becoming more detrimental, and it's hurting the pacing of the overall movie. So yes, he's now locked up. Geppetto's at the school still looking, still worried. And Stromboli begins to move his caravan outwards. No mistrusting of other humans. The woman he talked to uses her puppet to essentially assure him that, he can trust that. And conveniently so, the caravan passes by where Jiminy has gotten stuck. He got stuck in this little container for a bit here in this segment. And a rock conveniently, they slide into it, and it conveniently hits the bottle that Jiminy is in that lets him out, that allows him to get to Pinocchio. And when, Jiminy begins to pry about Pinocchio's, attitude towards things, this is where they both reveal that when he tells a lie, that his nose will grow. And the lies perpetuate up to where he almost has his nose all the way extended to the key. So he actually, this one I actually do appreciate for the amount of criticism I'm being living. They do have him have a flicker up movement to his head, indicating that he got the idea to lie on purpose. I actually do appreciate very small details like that to give us the idea that, oh, he caught on to something. Like, if he lies one more time, he can get access to the key. So he purposefully lies to get him closer to the key. And even, he kind of directs, or the language, or the dialogue is a bit more direct, and as well as he's pointing that out. And Jiminy's sort of, trying to figure out if he lied on purpose or whatever. So they get the key, and they are now on the run. They escape the second ordeal in being used in the show. However, on his way home, he's scooped up by a net, and he's lifted into this new caravan, which introduces us to the coachman and all of these kids that he's bringing along. And the coachman sings about this whole trust and, this whole song. I don't remember this song from the original. I don't remember this one. So I don't remember if this was a new thing or if it's from the original. But he essentially uses the kids' over willingness to want to go to this place to essentially to get Pinocchio to agree to go to this place that they are called Pleasure Island. And for what it's worth, I think that yes, it looks fantastic. Sure, all the cool stuff that you can imagine is here. So we get him introduced with Lampy, or Lampwake, I believe his original name is in the original movie. But I think Pinocchio calls him Lampy in this movie, so I'm not sure if they changed his name or by a slight variant. Point being, he's like with this kid for the majority of the time. And it, as they're riding through, it shows like some of the, the lawlessness of this place, and what little positives that provides and the more overwhelmingly negatives that provides, which introduces us to the root beer. So, as they are tucked into the boat, this convenient salesman lifts up 2 root beers to them and hands them to both Lampy and Pinocchio. Now, for those of you who don't know the original, they were provided actual, for the all intents and purposes, beer in the original, and cigars. But of course, this being the current Disney, the very more safe, down-to-earth Disney, I guess they weren't allowed to use either, they weren't even allowed to say the word beer, or to even, the cigarette one probably would have been harder, if anything, than the beer. I think. I'm not even sure. But point being, they don't use either. They use root beer. So that in itself is also very off-putting, because the whole point of this place is that it's supposed to be the ultimate temptation for kids. No rules. You're allowed to essentially break the rules or to be as much of an adult as you can understand that to be, which is, the whole drinking beer thing would come into that line of thinking. And they have this whole weird, bizarre segment where they're, like, breaking clocks to, like, directly... It's almost like a direct signal to Pinocchio for whatever reason. That moment is bizarre, and it's choreographed as if they're about to sing a song while they're doing it, but they never do. It's so... That part is so bizarre, and off-putting, and not in the correct way. It's like, why are they even doing this? Like, okay, they show them destroying the school. That part's fine, but destroying the clocks? And, like, the whole area is just, like, filled with clocks? Again, it feels like it's directly... supposed to be hitting Pinocchio specifically. It's like so bizarre. Anyways, the seagull who flies in gives Geppetto the intel of where they ended up. So the seagull somehow knows. Again, going back to the pacing, it just shows up to make move, get Geppetto over here. So get the seagull over there, and then okay. So. Meanwhile, we cut back to Lampy and Pinocchio, who are at this, the famous, probably the most, memorable scene, I would probably say, from Pinocchio, is them at the pool table, where we see them doing the whole drinking of the beers and the smoking of the cigars, but they have the root beer instead, and they're the beginning of the donkey transformation. And, for what it's worth, I was actually a bit surprised about how much they were showing on that. And one other reviewer said that they didn't show it, which is incorrect. They actually do show the transformation occurring. Now, how much difference the transformation is obvious. One is obviously from a cartoon to a cartoon drawing, and this one is a human into a CGI character change. So the change is quite drastic in that regard, but at least they tried. I gotta give them credit for that. Like, yeah, in the trailer they show it from the shadow perspective, which they do in the original movie, by the way. I checked it to double check. They do that in the original movie. They have the shadow image, so they're replicating it, but they also show the transformation. into a donkey. And to give this version a little bit of credit as well, they actually do use the word jackass, which is I didn't think they would actually say the word in a very current Disney movie, to be quite frank. Considering how safe everything else is in this movie, I'm surprised they even allowed that much. So, again, I'll give kudos to where it's due. The transformation was fine for what it was trying to do. And obviously we see these shadow-like creatures who also work at this place grab the donkeys once they're underground and are locked away. But Jiminy gets to Pinocchio, and after the full transformation sequence, Pinocchio essentially runs off with Jiminy with his ears transformed and his tail transformed. And again, to some of the creativity to it, I actually kind of don't even mind the transformation parts of this, whereas like his tail looks like it's still like, it's not like a donkey tail, but it's actually like a puppet tail that's donkey in shape, you know, it's like a mix. So I thought that was a bit of a creative choice that, you know, they didn't have to do, but it was like, oh, okay, they're clearly making it different from the normal donkeys, which, you know, since he was a talking marionette boy, his donkey would, I guess, in that way, turn into a unique donkey as well, a unique puppet donkey, if you will. But they manage to get to the water outside and they dive in. And again, this is where the pacing comes back to being an issue, where they get to the next sort of trial, if you will, and Jiminy just knows about Monstro. Like, okay, he just knows about that, Monstro being the whale. That is the last trial that Pinocchio must overcome in this movie. So, he gets to, the water. He has a small moment with the young woman from before. She tells him, like, their whole updated situation that happens all off screen. And it even shows, like, a quick cutaway gag of, like, Stromboli being arrested. Like, that happened so quickly. This is like, oh, okay, that settles that little conundrum, I guess. So Pinocchio gets back home, and that's when they spot Sophie, which leads them to get to the pier, where again he like temporarily hides for like a moment. But he's given the choice of like, you either choose your father or the fame, and he chooses his father in that moment, and he loses the ears and tail as like sort of the representation of like, he made the right choice in the direct, point of her saying that it was the correct choice for him to make. So pretty obvious dialogue there. So they head out to sea, or Pinocchio does, and sees Geppetto, and Pinocchio, in the process of like hurtling his way towards Geppetto using his super quick wooden boy legs to like steer himself using the seagull, he manages to narrate or tell Geppetto his entire story in like in like a sort of sum up scenario in like rapid succession. And it's the joke of like, oh, we did that all in one day, as I was mentioning before, which, as I was alluding to, caused some issues with the pacing. But they do get indeed taken in by Monstro. So while in there, and it doesn't take too long while they're in there for Pinocchio to get the idea, since he had started a fire earlier, he notices there's some oil, So he starts a fire, and eventually they are spit out. They rocket back to the land. There's a close call where Moncho's trying to recatch his prize, I guess. But he manages to make it to the shoreline, where Geppetto is unconscious / presumably on the verge of death, even. But Pinocchio cries a magical tear rolls down his face, and Geppetto wakes up, and we see that as they recollect themselves and as they begin to head back toward the light, we begin to see, presumably, the beginning of a potential transformation for Pinocchio as Jiminy talks with the ending narration to the movie. And that was Disney's Pinocchio. And obviously there were quite a number of issues here, from the pacing issues to adding in scenes that take away from other characters, warning signs, aka the Fox's stories, all fucked up because of what they did. And this constant rush of just go from one thing to the next. And yeah, I can see why this is easily just another criticized live action / CGI Disney remake. It doesn't hit much higher than most of the other ones from all the other ones I've seen and even reviewed some of them. So yeah, I'd probably give this like a 3 or 4 out of 10, I guess, if I were to pick a score. Again, the pacing is just it's so categorically too fast, and even when they have a chance to have an opportunity to have a very clear, distinct, this is what this character is supposed to be, they fuck it up. They have a chance to show the very dark and dangerous paths of the Pleasure Island, and they because it's current Disney, they're too afraid to say beer, they're too afraid to have the cigars, which I think they could have gotten away with beer. I actually do. I think they could have gotten away with it, and they were too chicken to even try, so they went with root beer. So yeah, I think that this movie is a far cry from the original, obviously, from the Disney's original Pinocchio. Probably, if you're, wanting to get your kid to, watch the movie, I'd probably say, let them watch the original movie. It, more distinctly, I think, gets the things across. It's been a while, so maybe I'm just being nostalgic. Maybe the movie is not as good as I remember. I don't know. I could be wrong about the original. It's been a long time. I would definitely be more critical if I've seen it now. That's for sure. But for what it's worth, again, a 3 or 4 out of 10. I'd probably, if I were to hard stick it, I'd probably go with a 4. So yeah, that is Disney's Pinocchio. And if you ended up enjoying this full review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. 1, head over to a petition to help small YouTubers. 2, to my Patreon and PayPal. And 3, to the PayPal. And 4, to my Discord server, where you can help and find other YouTubers and collab and do all that talking stuff and sharing your videos. And again, if you decide to help me on my Patreon and PayPal, that'll help support me and the channel. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.